Hi guys, it's Katie. Today I'm going to make sourdough bread. So I'm starting this morning. I'm going to feed my starter and I'm going to soak my flour. And I have quite a bit of starter in my jar. So I'm actually just going to take part of it out and feed it. And the rest of this I'll feed and turn into sourdough pancakes. So I'm just stirring this and I will put just a portion in here. That way I don't overflow my jar when I feed it. I'll put about 150 grams, that's 155 grams, which is just a little bit more than half a cup. And then I'll put some flour and some water, so equal weights of flour and water. I'll go ahead and do 50 grams of each. And I'm using whole wheat flour to feed my starter. 50 grams of flour and 50 grams of water. I'll go ahead and stir that. And then in my bowl I'm going to soak my flour. This is going to be a white loaf, so I'm using all-purpose flour. You can use bread flour, just something white. I'm also going to put olives in this, so it'll be an olive white loaf. I'm going to start with 600 grams of flour. Just measure out 600 grams. Alright, so that's 600 grams of flour. And I'm going to go ahead and add my salt. I was waiting previously, but I have been seeing other people add their salt right at this point, so I'll go ahead and do that so I don't forget to add it later and it just saves a step. I'm going to add only about 10 grams of salt right now because I'm going to be adding olives, some Kalamata olives, which have quite a bit of a saltiness to them. So 10 grams of salt, and I'm going to add 360 grams of water. Alright, so this is the same hydration as the last loaf I did, but it's going to behave quite a bit differently because it's all white flour. The bran in whole wheat flour can soak up water, and then it's like less available for the dough. Also, I added flaxseed to the last loaf, so that also soaks up quite a bit of the moisture, so you don't get as open as a crumb. So with this white flour, you'll get sort of a more open crumb, so larger, more irregular holes and a higher rise. And it will also feel a bit wetter when you go to knead it. I'm just going to mix the flour and the water and the salt just so that it combines and all the flour gets wet, but you don't need to knead it at this point. So that's what the dough looks like, super duper shaggy. So my starter looks like it's right at 8 ounces for volume. And put the lid on that. I'll put a cover on this. And we'll let these rest this morning for a few hours and then we'll come back to it around lunchtime. Alright guys, it is actually the next morning. I waited all day for this to rise up and it took nearly all day, and then by the time it was ready it was dinner time and I was making dinner and doing all that. So I'm just put the flour and water, that big bowl with the flour and the water, I put that in the fridge and I just left this to continue to get active. So it wasn't ready to bake yesterday. It would have been a disappointing loaf if I would have hadn't baked with this. So sometimes you need to feed an extra, feeding or two. So I'm going to go ahead and feed this again this morning and just start over as if this is where I was yesterday. So I'm going to feed it again, probably 50 grams and 50 grams of water. And I'll give that a stir, and what I'll do is I'll pull the bowl with the soaked flour, pull that out of the refrigerator so that it can come back to room temperature while this hopefully doubles by lunchtime. Scrape that down again so we can see when it comes up. You can also use a Sharpie marker and mark this level so you can see where it comes up, but let's see. Right now it's just shy of 1.5 cups, so I hope it to be somewhere around here before I use it. And here's the soaked flour from yesterday. Like I said, I put it in the refrigerator. Oh, it still looks shaggy. I haven't really done anything to it, but I'll leave it on the counter now so it can come back to room temperature. And then hopefully by lunchtime this has doubled and this has warmed, and we'll just continue on where I meant to continue on yesterday at lunchtime. Alright, so this is looking a lot more active. It was actually higher than this. It started to fall down, but it looks a lot better than it did yesterday. So I'm going to combine my starter with my soaked flour that has the salt in it. I'm also going to mix in some olives. This is about 100 grams of Kalamata olives. I chopped them up and I also sort of patted them dry with a cloth so they're not so wet. So I'll go ahead and mix these three things together and I'll start to knead the dough. I'll tear that out and I'll give this a stir. And then I'll pour in Alright, so about 150 grams of starter and then the 100 grams of olives. And go ahead and use this spoon just to start to mix those together. And then I'll switch to my hand and just mix everything until the olives stay in the dough so they don't go flying when I start kneading it. Alright, so that's somewhat staying together. Okay, so I've poured this out onto the counter. It's very sticky and it's hard to knead the way you would normally knead bread. So what you do is called the slap and fold. It's where you slap it onto the counter and it sticks to the counter and you pull it to stretch it to help develop that gluten, and then you fold it over itself. And then you scoop it up and you do it again. Slap, stretch, fold it on top of itself. Slap, stretch, fold it onto itself. And it's making a mess on the counter, but once it starts to come together, it will clean your hands and clean the counter.
Yeah, you got me.
You want to move a little quick. Okay, so I have kneaded this about 10 minutes, and it's still a sticky, wet mess. The texture reminds me of slime, like if you used to get slime out of the gumball machines. It's sticky and it's wet, but it kind of stays together, so it will leave a clean surface. So another way you can test to see if it's kneaded enough is to do the window pane test. And to do that, you just take a small amount and you kind of stretch it in all four directions, and you should be able to stretch it into a nice thin sheet like this. And you should be able to see light through it without it tearing. So eventually it will tear like that, but you should be able to stretch it thin enough to see light through before it tears. Okay, so that means it's kneaded enough. I'm going to put it in a clean container. So just gather it all up and plop it in there. Alright, so we're just going to let this sit on the counter and start to rise. Cover it with a plate, and we'll check on it in about an hour. Alright, so throughout the evening you're going to want to do stretch and folds. So here's your dough. You can see lots of bubbles are already forming. and it's rising up. And what you want to do is you want to kind of fold it on top of itself so that the bubbles can kind of build on each other and you get a nice tall loaf. And you can do this with your wet hand. I use a wet spatula. Just get it a little bit wet, shake off most of the water so that it doesn't stick as much. And so you're just going to take from the 4 different sides and you're just going to pull it up and put it in the center. So hopefully you can see. Just kind of carefully, without trying to deflate it too much, pull it up and put it to the center. And do the next side. Pull it up and kind of just flop it on top of itself. And I have made loaves of bread where I've completely forgotten to do this, and it still turns out great, but this is supposed to help give you an even higher rise. So you want to do that about every half an hour to 45 minutes for like 2, 3, or 4 times, however many times you can remember throughout the evening as it rises. Alright, so I'm getting ready to go to bed, so I'm gonna get this tucked in for the night, and I'm gonna put it in this bowl lined with a towel and dust it with some flour so that it doesn't stick, like that. And then get this put in here. I'm gonna try to shape it somewhat into a round loaf. I'll dust the counter just a little bit. And trying not to deflate it, I'm going to scoop it out onto the counter. Like that. And I just do a very basic shaping. I'm still practicing on shaping it perfectly, but just kind of gather it up. And that seam will be the bottom of the loaf. So I'll turn it over like this and then put it in the bowl like that. Ooh. So that seam is still on the top. And I'll dust a little bit more flour on top so the towel doesn't stick to it. And then fold this over like that, and then put this in the refrigerator, leave it in the refrigerator overnight, and we'll bake this tomorrow. Okay, so I'm getting ready to put my bread in the oven. I pulled this out of the refrigerator about an hour ago. I also have preheated my oven with the Dutch oven in there to 500 degrees. So I'm going to pull the bread out of this bowl, score it, put it in the hot Dutch oven, cover it up, and put it back in the oven. So see if I can do that without burning myself. So pull the whole towel out and then flip it onto my hand. Quickly score it. Carefully plop it in. Back into the oven. And I'm going to leave it at 500 degrees for the first 15 minutes, and then I'll turn it down to 450. Alright, so after 15 minutes, I'm going to reduce the temperature to 450 degrees and let it bake for another 15 minutes. Okay, so after a total of 30 minutes baking, I'm going to take the lid off and put it back in to finish baking. So we'll get a sneak peek at how it looks. Moment of truth. Oh, it looks pretty good. That. So stick it back in to brown it up a little bit. So that would be another 10 to 15 minutes. So about 45 minutes total baking time, 15 minutes at 500 covers, 15 minutes at 450 covered, and then 15 minutes at 450 uncovered. Alright, so it's time to take the bread out, see what it looks like. Very hot in the oven. Alright, we're going to let it cool till it's completely cooled, and then we'll slice into it and see how it looks on the inside. Smells very good though. Smells very olivey, and delicious. All right, who's excited to cut into this loaf of bread? I am. See what it looks like. Ooh, looks pretty good. Smells really good. You can really smell the olives. Alright, I'm going to give it a taste. Got a crispy crust. Mmm. Mm-hmm. It's really good. Mmm. I love the olive flavor. Alright guys, that's everything I have for you today. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. Leave me any comments down below. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks for watching. Bye!